So, welcome to our final session in the series on HR research. Last session, we had a look at a detailed study or a project that was done to reduce absenteeism rates to save on a lot of costs, maybe improve productivity. We came up with some good ideas about what we can do to move absenteeism rate down. And ideas like that would apply to many other things you're trying to change in HR as well. In today's session, we're going to look at some of the suspicions we might have in terms of why the results happen. I mean, from a scientific point of view, to question everything about the results and try to have a deeper understanding about them. We will also talk about different policies and programs that we can use, HR policies, programs we can use to condition behavior. I mean, we came up with a few, things like changing working conditions, having incentives, and so on. But where do you get a comprehensive list of these, or at least categories of these? We're going to have a look at that, and we're going to wrap up this interesting topic called HR research, of which you've gotten three sessions worth of framework within which to think, so that as you go forward to start your professional practice of HR, you would use that framework within which to make the changes and to optimize and fine tune your workforce. So let's have a look at what we did last week. We tried to tackle absenteeism percentage from about 12% to 8%. You guys did a great job at coming up with all sorts of things that we could try from a theoretical point of view. That's theoretical thinking. And then based on more context about the people in the company and maybe the place, we were able to think in probabilistic terms. The key is, where do you get this list of things that you can possibly do to your employees to change their behavior? So absenteeism in this case is the behavior. We pick things to change it. Now, I should go backwards and tell you, unless you have practice in trying these different things with a certain group of people, you wouldn't really know the effects of it or the efficacy. However, we can at least start in this session on HR research framework, we can at least start thinking about the types of things that you can try. Now, I'm going to refer back to our medical friends. Take a look at this. There's a doctor who has a patient. Now, the patient comes in, has some symptoms. The doctor's job is to diagnose those symptoms, or the symptoms could present themselves in many different ways. But the doctor, a good doctor, a seasoned or a practiced doctor, will actually ask the patient several questions. They will visually observe. In this case, the arm is clearly broken. Sometimes you don't know, though. Your ankle hurts. Maybe it's a sprain. Maybe there's something stuck. Maybe it's a fracture. You don't know. So the doctor then uses diagnostics devices, x-rays, MRIs, etc., or just their own intuition to say, okay, I think this is wrong with you. And based on who that person is, their age, their gender, their height, their body mass, their medical history, their ethnicity, their culture, the job they do, the environment they live in, they take all these into account and then come up with the best course of treatment at the moment. And that course of treatment, whatever they choose, has to have the greatest likelihood of working with the lowest cost. And in this case, the cost could be monetary. It could be, if it's disruptive to the life of the person, how harsh are the meds, for example. In the case of children, of course, you have to take into account a lot of other emotional things. So doctor, the good thing is, has a documented list in books, a list of things that they can actually do to a patient. For ethics purposes, everything has to be researched and documented. And they could choose from anything to do with, let's say, surgery. They can do medications, medication therapy, surgery therapy. They could do holistic measures, naturopathic measures. It could be physio. It could be a whole lot of different things that they can do, including environmental changes. And at the end, though, a good doctor will try things and then come to a realization that, wait, the patient cannot get better with the thing that they're experiencing. However, we can put them in what we call palliative mode and make them suffer less, so less pain or less discomfort. And quite often, patients go through their whole lives in that mode. But a doctor who just pretends and goes on and on and on forever and tries everything in the textbook as if they just Googled it and a checklist popped up, that's maybe not a good practice. So HR in this case is not any different. Look, you have a problem at hand. You looked at it, you diagnosed it, you use analytical tools, right? We don't have MRIs and X-rays and so on, blood tests, but we do have data. And we have tools to manage that data like Excel and pivots and other things that you might discover later on. And we pinpoint a problem. And then knowing our people, the context, the people, the place, and the time, and your ability to think in probabilistic terms, you then say, okay, what can I do? Now, here's the thing. HR people, we don't have a list. It's not all documented. It's like an article somewhere. You hear about it at a conference. Something might be common sense, like daycare or an incentive or money or pay increases. But where's this magical list that you can just look down and pick things? Well, I'll tell you, it doesn't exist, right? If any one of you were to write a book with everything we can do in HR to our employees to change their behavior, the conditions under which it would work, and then maybe some historical data of when it did work, you can probably make a fortune. But there's a lot. There's tens of thousands of things that you can do. A lot of them are textbooky, but there's ones that have not even been invented yet that you will invent, right? Not that they don't exist. We just didn't realize. As an example, when I first got started in HR, flex time was not a thing. I mean, sure, somebody might have had the idea, but somebody coined the term. They made the term flex time, and it took off. Enough magazines started talking about it. It was in conferences. People started practicing it. Next thing you know, flex time became a thing. All right? So in HR, what are our categories of programs and policies? Now, I'm going to use those two words because whatever we do in HR to our employees is written down as either a program or a policy. Now, you don't have to get nervous about the differences between the two words. It's okay. A lot of times we use them interchangeably. You'll soon realize then what the difference is. For example, everything we do in HR is a policy. Policy might be a set of rules, how you maybe execute the rules, examples of those executions, how you would do it. A policy could be a zero tolerance policy, a no theft policy. It could be a health and safety policy. It could be a wellness policy, right? It could be a no late policy or no social media at work policy. But some of these policies require you to use resources, right? Whenever you use resources to execute a policy, generally that's a program. So for example, as part of my health and safety policy, I have a program called a flu shot program, meaning I hire a nurse, I pay, and I give my employees free flu shots, right? Or I might have a safety shoe program. I buy safety shoes for my employees. I might have a wellness policy that has a program where I give lunches, good nutritious lunches to my employees for $1. Okay, so there's a lot of policies and some of them are programs, but don't worry too much about the difference, right? Let me show you these categories. These are very broad categories, and we'll use a few examples in each. I think the most notable, the most recognizable would be compensation. So anytime you use any mix within the compensation mix, any element of it, you are using compensation to change behavior. For example, outright pay, cash. It could be awards or rewards or recognition. It could be incentives or perks. It could be compensation in terms of your benefits, right? So imagine you find that the root cause of why your people are behaving the way they do is money, because you are paying much less than everybody else in your industry. Then giving pay increases to people is a compensation measure that would change that behavior. You might find that it is more about Abraham Maslow's pyramid and self-actualization and recognition. Might be social. Maybe you provide more money towards social activities. It could be more time off. You don't know. It could be benefits. So compensation is a pretty big, broad spectrum category. But then we have this thing called working conditions. It might not be the money, right? We used to think money solved everything. Not necessarily. Money is not necessarily the biggest thing right now. Again, I refer you to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of human needs pyramid. But working conditions. Maybe people are behaving the way they do fully or in part because of the conditions, the environment within which they work. And I'm not just talking about dirty. It could be smelly. It could be temperature-wise. It could be a lot of different things, including the surroundings where they sit, for example. And we'll talk about ergonomics later as well. It could be a sick building syndrome. It could be a ventilation problem. It could be noise problems. It could be dirty floors. So when you start fixing things within working conditions, or what we call hygiene factors by Hertzberg, then you might just have a solution to the problem of why employees are behaving the way they do. And I want you to ask yourself, if you're going to be working for 40 years, what type of an environment would you like to be working in? Do you want a very comfortable office with beautiful furniture, with a nice view, or you don't mind? Maybe you don't mind working in a basement. Maybe you don't want windows, or you're indifferent to it. Okay? So there's a lot of things in working conditions. Now keep in mind, each of these things I'm talking about, there are other courses that fill in the ideas for it. And then over the years, when you go to conferences and you read books and you read articles, you get more and more and more ideas around it. So start thinking, come up with something ingenious, right? There's a smart guy in the 1990s who said, we're going to put artificial plants, not real plants, artificial plants in the offices. And that lowered absenteeism considerably in that particular company. Who knew? There's somebody who said we're going to pipe in music, right? To change the noise levels in the facility. It was a factory. We had a case where somebody did industrial aromatherapy. It was like these huge aromatherapy systems that neutralize the odor. Now, if you feel that people behave the way they do because of training or lack of, or the need for different type of training or untraining or learning, then you would use training and development as a technique. Now, you haven't taken T&D course yet, but training is generally for immediate use, and development is more for future, okay? So if you find that people behave the way they do because they are not comfortable with their job, let's say a call center operator who's nervous about product knowledge, they get stressed the more customers they speak to, and you find out turnover is high. Turnover is when somebody quits, you have to replace them, right? Or productivity is low. So you would then train behavior, or you would untrain behavior. And I have a story for you later on. So very creative. And some of you might actually go into the T&D space, and you learn about andragogy and pedagogy and concepts of how to put messages in a brain to allow a person to be more competent. And that competency could be anything from how to do their job, how to use machinery, right down to how to think. Their attitude can be modified. It's about behavioral modification. It could be training happiness, or how to think about happiness, to change perceptions. There's so much to it, right? Now, some of you might feel that people behave the way they do, maybe not because of money or working conditions or anything else, but it could be the job itself. Think about it. You've all had work, either for money, or you've done work for the family and the household. Some work you like, some work you hate. But you must have always thought, I wish this job was slightly different, but you never spoke up. So we referred to job design. Why don't we look at the jobs, the actual job, on a job description that was designed 20, 30, 40 years ago, revisit it and see how can we change this to match up with the needs, the occupational needs of a current generation. So we use things like rotation, job enrichment, job enlargement. I mean, some of you in this room wouldn't mind having a job that is not so broad. It's where they tell you what to do, A, B, C, D, and you just do A, B, C, D. You don't want the breadth of responsibility or enrichment. Some of you would hate that. You might do it for a little while, but you want what we call more organic nature of a job where you can go freely in directions. Your boss is supportive of that. It depends. You decide that. But when you know your employees and the type of job and the type of situation and the rigidity that it deserves, you would then realize, hey, maybe I should just change my job a little bit. Okay? Task orientation, letting people do more than one thing versus just one thing. eliminate boredom, tedious nature of the job. Now, this is a new one that I'm adding. It's called organizational structure. Now, you're going to learn about this in OB, right? But you all know what a structure is. I mean, if you belong to a family, there's a hierarchy. There's people that you talk to in certain levels in different ways. But is it possible that people behave the way they do, your employees, either fully or in part, because of the way the organization is set up? And within that, we will include the idea of corporate culture. You think it's corporate culture, maybe, that is responsible for making people behave a certain way? Is that the root cause? So, for example, if you had a corporate structure, an organizational structure that is very rigid, Likert style, it's very top-heavy. There's so many layers between you on an organizational chart and your boss that you have to go through 4 people just to make your voice heard, and it's very slow and it's not conducive to innovation, then yeah, maybe you wouldn't like it. Some people would. You know, take the military, for example. Military is a very deep organization, very rigid in nature. And it has to be chain of command, because things have to work in a certain ordered way or things can go wrong. But then on the flip side, take a record company like HMV out of London. You know, that culture, that structure is so loose, so organic, that their motto is get the job done. I'm telling you what job I need to get done. Get the job done. In fact, their organizational culture is so loose that you can actually go into the office dressed in a bathing suit if you wanted to, barefoot. They're not going to look at you funny, but they're looking for results. Okay? Part of culture would be recognition of individual needs, group needs, creating a social environment to some extent, a familial environment, recognizing other cultures, ethnicities, different generations. So again, I won't get into too much depth on that. You are going to be learning about it in your OB course and other courses as well. But consider how you can modify an organization structure to make people work differently, change their behaviors. In fact, read up about IBM. IBM, an international company, International Business Machines, was a very rigid culture because it was run by an ex-military person. Until about 20 some odd years ago, they changed it. You no longer had to wear blue and white and black shoes, white shirt, blue suit. Women had to wear skirts, females. But now they've changed. And they've refocused, re-energized on their business. Completely more innovative organization. Now, I don't know how techie you are. You don't have to be. I myself, I enjoy tools. I really do. I love Home Depot. I like Lowe's. I've got every tool in the world. But in your business, as an HR person, I think you should, to some level, pay attention. And in fact, ask around about the types of tools that your employees use to do their job. Because it could be possible that employees behave, at least in part, the way they do, due to the tools that they use to do their job. For example, a 50-pound drill, a drill machine used to make holes in something, you know, a person's lifting it 80 times a day. Maybe make it more ergonomic, put a handle on the side, maybe automate it. So you press a button and the hole gets drilled. So I'm referring to PPEs, right? And I'm referring to ergonomics. Those are also tools. Look at this in an office environment. What tools do we have? Well, you're using pens, pencils, you're using keyboards, mice, monitors. Those are all tools. The chair that you sit on, the desk, those are all tools to do your job. So why can't we make those more ergonomic, right? Why not use PPEs, better, more comfortable hard hats, better safety shoes, vests, aprons? I'll give you a couple of stories here. We had a company that was doing a lot of welding, just like this guy in the middle here with the yellow hard hat. And when you weld, sometimes these sparks fly. Sparks. Now, human nature suggests that you either stay or you fly. Fight or flight, right? You either run away from the spark or you stay and say, what the heck? We're not conditioned to think that. As soon as a spark happens, your body immediately says, jump back, right? And what would happen quite often is when a welder would jump back, the part would drop. And when the part they're welding drops, there's a dent or scratch, they have to melt the whole thing again and start over. That's, low productivity in that case. So what this company tried is all sorts of different things: leather vests, vests like aprons, so on, so on, so on. They looked at the cost, the comfort level. They found that employees were not wearing those leather vests or aprons because they were sweaty. They would make them hotter, and they were a bit heavy. So they brought in this material called mylar. And it wasn't that cheap. I mean, it was about $20 a person every month. And mylar is just very lightweight, thin material, but it's very safe. It's fireproof, and they would wear entire coats. So even their arms are covered. Even if it's hot outside, they'd feel cool. But when the spark comes, they know. Deep down in their brain, subconsciously, they know the spark's not going to hurt me, and that got trained as well. Okay? I'll give you another story, a personal one. If you ever get a chance to come and see my office at Seneca, B3062, on campus, I sit in a chair. But my old chair was just a regular chair. It wasn't cheap, but it was a regular chair. And I found that because of my back starts hurting a lot if I sit in it for longer than an hour, hour and a half. I found that the amount of work I did, extra work, reading, researching, writing, creating videos for you, my customers, that work ended quicker because of my back. If I spend fewer hours in a day and I just go home creating this stuff, I create less. And that doesn't help you. So our health and safety office, they kind of had a look. And by the way, our health and safety manager is a graduate of ours. He had a look, and they offered me a chair. It costs a lot of money. The $1,200 chair, I turned it down, so I got a $900 one, a Herman Miller. And I actually sat down in it. And it was so comfortable, so ergonomically correct with multiple lumbar support. The gel cushion underneath was really good, that I found that I was spending at least 2 more hours a day at my desk creating, researching, producing for you. So, that's a pretty good story, right? And I have one more story at the end for you relating tools. Let's do this one here, the last one. Discipline. Something we are not willing to talk about, right? Do you feel that your employees maybe are behaving the way they do because they're not being disciplined? And don't think of discipline as what you would do to a child. Like go to your room, go to the corner. I'll take your candy away. Although it's pretty much the same idea. Think of discipline as more of a zero tolerance approach. Or look, I didn't say anything before, I'm saying it now. And outlining it with communication, saying this is what you're costing the company. I mean it. Literally, smarten up or else. But managers, I think many managers are afraid to do that. They don't know the consequences. They try to be the nice guy, the hero. I'm not sure that's a good thing for the organization. I think just like any parent who at some point has to tell children, look, I mean business now. And the motto is, if you say it, then actually mean it. And if you mean it, you better do it. No point in telling a kid, let's say a 10-year-old, if you don't do this, I will take that away from you. And then you never do it. You never take it away. You put yourself as a parent in the perspective, in the 10-year-old shoes. They don't think like you. Okay, and the younger person is, they don't think like an adult. Think about it. But you assume they do. So they get away with it because in their mind it's like, well, what's the big deal? I didn't do anything wrong. I'll get to my homework, don't worry. Writing on the wall, what's the big deal? We'll just clean it. But if you keep doing that time after time, guess what happens? A child now has no reference point to say, I will get disciplined, or in fact, what that discipline is. But then one day, after a few years, when that culture of discipline or lack of has already been established, and then you put your foot down and say, I'm going to take all your electronics away, and you do, that child now is a bit confused, saying, what is this? Where did this come from? And then they might act out maybe in a worse way. And your employees are the same way. They necessarily don't understand why you're doing this now, whereas it's been an established culture that we could get away with this all of a sudden. So quite often when an organization changes hands, ownership, there's a really good way to bring in a certain amount of discipline, but then discipline attached to a reward, that's always a good thing as well. And there's all sorts of consultants who do this sort of work. and there's a lot of psychology involved as well. But discipline is something I think should be introduced into every system of management, but discipline with care, right? I care for my employees. I want them to do what's right for the organization, but don't abuse our policies, because then we will start cracking down. Okay? Now, one more story, and it's a hospital story. So I'm going to combine training with tooling. Okay? So there's a hospital. It's a regional hospital, quite large, and they have a pharmacy department. Now, the pharmacy department, they're really good. You know what a pharmacist does, right? They dispense medications, and quite often they have to mix the medications. It's called compounding. So in this case, what they had about 9 or 10 pharmacists, and they worked in the basement. There was no windows, and that might have been part of the reason for the frustration, but not quite. So what happened one day is HR got a complaint from a couple of pharmacists, actually, and the complaints kept adding up. And the complaint was that they couldn't read what the doctor wrote on the prescription, the script. And you've heard this, right? Doctor's handwriting is bad. Now, of course, it's digital. This story is a little bit older. And so HR kind of said, hang on, that's not right. And they said, but what's the problem? This is not new. And the pharmacy people, you know what they're saying? They said, look, we take our job seriously. Because we can't read the dosage, is that a 25 or a 35, right? They actually have to go to the patient's room, which could be a long walk if you've ever been to a large hospital. Go check the patient's chart, and then double check that, in fact, what they think the doctor wrote is the correct dose. If they didn't, the patient could get harmed. They're true medical professionals. And they did that, and it was causing so much stress, and because they were behind on mixing the meds, because they were walking all over the hospital. Here's what HR did. They looked at it, and they said, here's how we're going to change that behavior. It's not the pharmacists, it's the doctors. So what they did is they, first of all, put doctors, and they're busy, so in 15-minute segments, they put them in training. It was called unpenmanship. Now, penmanship is your competency of how to write using a pen or pencil. And the training taught them how not to write, studied their hand, and then they allowed the doctors to choose several tools. Now, the tools are pens, and they tried everything from a 50-cent cheapo pen, really cheap, to $150 Mont Blanc, and they settled on about an $8 gel type of pen that had an ergonomic handle, so it was easy to use. And then they were given more training in 15-minute segments of how to write. And you know what? After a couple of months of this going around, doctors, it just became intuitive for them. First of all, they respected the fact that there was a problem, and then the complaints from pharmacy went down to pretty much zero, meaning the pharmacists were a lot more relaxed on that account. They were able to focus on their job. Okay, so I want you to kind of synthesize and think in those terms of how can I think outside of the box? What can I do to my employees? And there's a certain amount of trying or experimentation involved, I guess. Which categories of programs, policies am I going to tackle? And don't be afraid to ask other people. By the way, when I say think outside of the box, that's new thinking. We should also say stay within the circle. There's a circle of ethics and the law that you can't just go around trying everything on everybody. As an example, that industrial aromatherapy that I mentioned, you couldn't just start doing it. There might be people with allergies and asthma problems. So they had it tested, and they came up with something that was hypoallergenic and neutral, right? So have a think. This is going to take you years and years to develop this, just like a research scientist who takes lab notes every time something worked or didn't work. You too would do that. In fact, a great way to document all of this is every time you try something, and whether there was success or not, you should always write a little article about it. It doesn't have to be an article. It could be a blog post. It could be just for yourself, but share with the world, okay, what you found, what your findings were. And don't forget context. So for the rest of this session, I want to talk about this thing called suspects. Now, I don't know if you know what a suspect is or a suspicion. I know you know what a suspicion is, right? You are suspicious about something. You're questioning it. You have a doubt. In science, we call it a rogue. Although rogue, I'm not sure what it means in any other language, but it's just something that's out of the ordinary, something you have to take a deeper look at. And there are several suspects that we could focus on to try to figure out. Well, here, let me go back here. See, we tried this study, right, on absenteeism, and right about here, we started getting good results. Absenteeism started dropping. And a few months later, we concluded that it was a success. Zero tolerance did the trick. And then we keep our eye on it, just like a doctor would. They keep their eye on it every 6 months or a year to make sure that it's still successful. But success is good. Okay, don't get me wrong. It's good. You can relax. You did a great job. You saved the company millions. But because we have time and we have access to data, and you are a good HR research scientist, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to explain a couple of things. First of all, you see these little peaks up here in these valleys, these ups and downs? Can we predict those? Do I suspect that those things are recurring, or why did it happen? And the other thing is, you ask yourself, did absenteeism really go down because of what I did? Or was there something else, another influence on my people that caused absenteeism to go down anyways? Okay? So I'm going to give you 4 different suspicions, or at least categories of. The first one is on stage. It's the easiest one to understand. Okay? Do you think people change their behavior if they think they are being watched? Of course. I mean, you all behave differently if you're by yourself, you're with, let's say, your significant other, with your family, your grandparents, your colleagues. We change our behavior depending on who's looking at us. In fact, if you get access to children under the age of 12, peek at them, but don't let them know you're watching, and let them do what they do. But then let them know that you're watching, and as soon as they see you, see how they change their behavior. Right? That's called on-stage suspect. So it is quite possible that right around here, employees figured out that managers are watching. All of a sudden, they never used to watch, now they're watching. Or outside consultants start coming in with clipboards to take notes, and video goes up, video cameras. Of course they're going to change their behavior. They're going to behave the way they think you want them to behave. But it's short term. Okay? So keep that in mind. If you're ever doing a study like this, make sure you're doing things that are not so obvious. If your consultants are coming in, what I like to do is get the consultants in uniform, hire them as employees. Let them pretend to do work, but then they can observe. You can also put up video cameras in many cases as well. Now, another one, probably my favorite, is called historical or in the gap suspect. And history, you all know what history is. It's when time moves from point A to point B. It's when time moves, right? So what has happened in the space of time, like this? Space of time in this case is from January of this year to April of 3-4 years later, right? What has happened in the space of time, specific events, or what we call precipitating events. Think about a raindrop falling on your head. It's a one-off moment. Now, a raindrop might fall on you again and again and again, or never. So do you see these reds and blues, these circles? These are specific blips in the space of time. They're not like flat line. They're like extraordinary. They're like wide peaks and valleys. In fact, look at your life. From the moment you were born to today. That's your space of time. In fact, a few months before you were born, you were aware of your surroundings, noises, movements. But, if you don't have anything extra to report to me, there's really nothing in the gap. Your life is just straightforward. But I would suggest that maybe the first time you walked, the first time you talked, the first time you tried a hot food, first time you fell, first time you rode a bicycle, the first time you fell and scraped your knee. So not only are these precipitating events or extraordinary events in your life, they're also in your parents' life. The first time you went to school, your first friend, your first boyfriend, your first girlfriend, your wedding, your own child, an accident that you had in a car, your first job, Okay, that's you on a personal level. But in an organization or in society or in the economy, think about it. There's some of these things that only happen once. Like this thing, I can't predict it, whatever this was. Maybe it only happened that one time. Maybe it was a bad snowstorm. Maybe it was a 9/11, for example, right? I mean, around 9/11, everything in New York City shut down and all over North America. In Quebec, we had an ice storm a decade ago, and a lot of things shut down for 2 months. We can explain those things. We can adjust our understanding of why something happened because of that one big thing that happened. What if when a company gets sold, right? That's a big event. When a government changes in the United States every 4 years, it's predictable. It happens. Things happen to industry. Now, some of these things, they're predictable. Like, take a look, the red ones up here. Every April, December, April, December, April, December. Every April and December, something's happening. Absenteeism goes up. How do we predict this? Well, in April, it's called April effect. First nice day after a cold winter, you're cooped up. It's called cabin fever. You're cooped up inside. People tend to take extra time off, a few hours here and there, to be outside. And in December, it's called a holiday effect or the Christmas effect, because there are major holidays in December. In office environments, people tend to take more time off. They loosely interpret the rules, and management lets it go because you're in the holiday mood. Not much gets done in December in many industries. Funny though, in factories, leading up to December, absenteeism drops. Because for some reason, people think bonuses are based on that time of year where it really isn't. End of August, when school is starting, if you have a lot of employees with young children, school age, end of August, they squeeze in last minute time off to be with the children before they start school. Right? Start of the fall. In other countries, it could be various holidays. If you had a lot of employees in 1 month who had a birthday, that could explain things. But you look for these patterns. So I want you to ask yourself, what are some of these predictable things that happen on a cyclical basis? Right? Like I said, throughout the year. Could be day of the week. Or it could be several years apart. Like I said, government changes, economic downturns, stories in the news. It could be a lot of weather patterns. Now, related to historical suspect is this thing called maturational suspect. Now, what maturational suspect says that did the results that you're seeing happen because time has passed? So maturational in that sense doesn't mean you're mature or you're immature. We don't label it that way. We think of it as some changes that have happened simply because of the passage of time. So take a look here. From here, beginning to the end, let's say 3 years later, time has passed. And it's quite possible that simply because of the passage of time, your results would have gotten better. Right? You've matured to the point where you are physically better than you were at age 1. You have matured to the point, if you're in your mid-20s, that you are cognitively better. Emotionally, maybe. But with humans, the curve is that after a certain age, then about 58, your cognitive ability starts to go down and your physical ability starts to go down as well. So maturity happens both ways. Now, in an organization, what do you think matures? Well, maybe the company itself matures. Think about it. Maybe it was a new company. It was a new company here. And all of a sudden, people started getting the processes. They started gelling, synthesizing, collaborating. And because of that magical moment, things just started to get better anyways. The economy matures, right? We get good years, and all of a sudden, and I'll just go back to my original chart. Let's say we had some really good years over here. And all of a sudden about here, your employees start hearing in the news words like recession and so on. They're not economists. They don't understand what it means, but they want to keep their job now. So they start behaving. Absenteeism starts to go down simply because they fear for their job loss. Could it be that right around here we had new management? They weren't really communicating. They were looking the other way. And all of a sudden around here, they kind of got to know management and their style, and employees said, this is respect. We'll start behaving better. It could be. Governments mature. Society itself matures. Think about it, right? Over a period of time. Society's sense of work ethic matures. We don't work 6 days a week anymore. If now, I think we're headed towards a 4-day work week. Your attitude towards work changes because of societal changes. Generations change. Our understanding and acknowledgement of things like mental health and emotional health changes. And that could influence our results. It might not be because of what you did. It could simply be because of passage of time. So getting back to our doctor friend, what if a doctor prescribes something to you? And, a year later they tried 3 different things and all of a sudden you got better. A good doctor will always ask you. They'll say, yeah, you got better. They're not going to pat themselves on the back and say, I'm a hero. They're going to say, okay, you got better. Now let's go over changes in your life. And you weren't going to tell the doctor. You didn't know you're supposed to, but you said, oh yeah, I changed my job a month ago. Now the doctor starts thinking maybe the new job is a different physical environment, different people, less stress. And maybe that's what made you better. Right? Think about it. So you want to look at every angle, every possibility of what could have caused our results to be the way they are. And maturational is just something you study over time, no pun intended, to kind of get a better understanding of could it be. And I'm just going to remind you before I do the last one, is you don't have to rigidly do what I'm proposing here. Okay? Look at historical suspects or on stage or maturational or the next one. These are things you keep in the back of your mind so that as you're interpreting results and looking at them critically, although we got what we wanted, we're happy, just so that you can have a better, more deeper, more granular understanding of what it just took place. And you become a much better HR professional for it. Now the last one, I'm going to group a bunch of things together. It's called interaction suspect or instrument decay or instrument suspect. Okay. Now, what it is not is your results changing because the researchers, you, HR people, interacted with the person, the employee. No, that's not what it is. That's on stage. What interaction suspect is how this whole thing was done. How was it done? When was it done? Was the timing off? For example, if you tried to do a whole major training program to change customer service reflections, and you did it in December, you can't conclude because December is not a neutral month to do anything. Neither is April. How do you know? They're just not, I'm telling you. Right? Because absenteeism tends to go high anyways in those months. You don't want to start anything on Friday. Or you don't have bad news announcements and then try to get your employees' cooperation. You have to pick a neutral month. It could be the way you did the study in terms of, let's say, the survey itself. Were the questions on the survey appropriately written? Did they respect the rules? Were they in the language that were understood? What was your sample size? Out of 1,000 employees, how many surveys did you get back? Like if you only got 10 or 20% back, and you're concluding your results on it, shame on you. I mean, that's bad science. Well, people work for you. You're paying them. You should be getting at least 80, 90% back. Right? But they mean nothing if the questions weren't well worded. And we have experts for that as well. In fact, many of you will become really good at it, survey writing. And I'm not suggesting we do surveys on paper. We have electronic methods on the web now. SurveyMonkey, for example, Google Forms, etc. Now, could it be what we call data mortality or the death of data? Could it be that you're ignoring data? The data's there, you just didn't bother collecting it. You didn't ask enough people. You didn't interview. You only use survey. Maybe you only got half of the surveys back, or you got them all back, but you got your results after you typed in the responses from half of them. I mean, that's a joke, right? You need to tabulate all of them. That's data mortality. You killed data. You lost it. Could it be data fraud? And I want to talk about that extensively, but data fraud combined with bias could simply be that people who are responding, including you yourself, are not truthful about the data. And we all know people don't necessarily tell the truth. That's why we use other techniques like interviews. You've been to a mall, shopping mall, and an old lady stops you. It's her job. She wants to do a little survey of what you thought about the product. And you say, yeah, great product. I use it 3 times a week, etc., etc. And then you just wanted to walk away and just, you didn't want it to lose her job, but you wanted to answer the questions, not really. You wanted to continue shopping. The truth is you never used that product. You lied. You committed data fraud. Now that company is going to use your results, and others who also lied, and maybe commit millions of dollars to marketing and advertising. That happens. People do that all the time. But your employees shouldn't. That's why we use techniques like interviews in addition to surveys and archival research. We try to validate our results. Because when you do interviews, you can use nonverbal cues. What do we call that? Informal communication or body language. We can reword questions in an interrogative or probing mode. And you're learning this in other courses, of course. But bias, let's say a boss, the one on the left, really, really doesn't like the company or you as a bunch of employees. It's all in it about themselves. That's what they're in for. And they're willing to just look at results a whole different way, not communicate properly, to try to change or bias the way the results end up. You yourself might be biased to serve your own purposes. You're an HR person, your boss made you do this project, you want to prove the results. In Excel, I showed you how to calculate several different numbers to prove your point. They're not necessarily all legitimate numbers, or they could be, they're just misrepresented. The boss on the right might be such a nice guy, he doesn't want anyone to get in trouble, and he might just fraudulate all the responses so that you'll get the reward or you'll be promoted or whatever it might be. And we get that quite often on performance reviews, which are also, right, we're using performance review data to enact training and hiring and compensation. So I'm going to talk about data fraud as well, a couple of different examples. But here's the 4 suspicions that we talked about here, okay? Now, how do you control some of these suspicions? Well, let's not go too far and say we always have to. If you're in a scientific lab, you can control the situation by locking doors and using different containers to have all your specimens separate, your bacteria and all that sort of thing. In a hospital, in a psychiatric ward, if you're studying patients, you can do that. You can lock doors so there's no cross-contamination, no contact. In HR, it's kind of hard to use some of these scientific techniques. So let's not worry too much about it. You should be happy that you just have a deeper understanding of your results by acknowledging these suspects. However, there is a method called the control group method that maybe you've heard of, so I'll just kind of go over it quickly. In many cases, you can use this in HR. I've seen it done, especially if you have, let's say, 2 offices or 2 factories that are close by, but the people don't know each other. At, let's say, a downtown, we had an office building with 10 floors. We used to use 1 floor as a control group and another floor as a focus group or experimental group, because the 2 floors really didn't interact. They didn't know each other. It could be different shifts, like a day shift and an afternoon shift you can use. And here's how it works. You use pivots, for example, and let's say you're trying training. Okay, let's pick training. You're going to put $1.2 million into training for your employees to improve production. Don't do training to all of them. Grab about 100 of them or 50 and group them into 2 boxes. Now, they're just lists, okay, 2 lists. You choose them randomly. Different ages, different seniority, that sort of thing. And each list, if you looked at their characteristics, they're about roughly equal, okay? They're about the same. You don't have all old people in one, all females in one, all males in one. They're kind of cross-representative. Now, the 50% of the people in the control group, don't do anything to them. Leave them alone. But the 50% in the focus group, or officially the experimental group, applied the treatment to them, exposed them to the treatment. In this case, the treatment is training. Training we're going to use to improve productivity. That's the behavior. So then let's keep an eye on both of them. Okay, now I did a little chart just to show you. So up to the red point, that's when the training started. Okay, so before that, all 100% of people were exactly the same. That's that orange line. But as soon as you gave the training, you would think that the people who got the training, their productivity would improve and the line would go up. If at the same time the control group line also went up, it shows you with confidence that the training didn't really have the effect. If, on the other hand, after training, the people who got the training, the focus group, their line went down, productivity went down, and the control group stayed the same, it means stop the training right away. It's having a negative effect, right? So you're looking for that. Now, you can statistically measure the gap between the two. It's the yellow number minus the orange number divided by the orange number, right? High minus low divided by low. But in this case, I'm not proposing that. What I'm saying is look at the chart. You know what your confidence is? That there's a significant gap between the two. On average, when we get to the end of the training, we've achieved what? We're going from about 8 to, let's say, 16 units. That's doubling of your productivity per hour because of training. That's your confidence. Now, if your organization does a lot of statistics and things, fine. Measure it. In Excel, you can do that as well. Okay, just look at the numbers. Right, 19 to 8.6. 19 minus 8.6 divided by 8.6 as a percentage. Oh, wait. You can right-click in pivots and it'll do it for you, huh? Show values as. So you can, to some extent, use focus group, but not always in HR because we're not a closed environment. Like, for example, what if right around here in June, in the lunchroom, the focus people start talking to the control people and they ask, so how's your training going? And the control guy goes, what training? What? Huh? And they didn't know about it. And they start getting nervous, saying, oh my God, you got training because they're going to keep you. They're going to fire me. So you want to control the message out as well. Try to maintain as much secrecy as possible. But I generally, at the same people at the same time, it's rare. You can always try. Have some fun with it. Okay? I want to give you one more example before I end off. And this will be the last session, right? I'm going to go back to data fraud. I'm going to go back to data fraud. And I want you to, we'll do it from an education point of view because you'll understand this, right? But there's an educator, guy with the glasses, and there's knowledge. And I already told you where we know what knowledge we need to give you. We ask employers. The government tells us what we believe you need to know today and in the future. Now that knowledge, in whatever form it is, it has to get from the educator to your brain. That yellow line, the process is called andragogy or pedagogy, right? The effective transmission and transformation of knowledge. Now, you as a student have received that knowledge, hopefully, right? Now, that knowledge we will not assess but evaluate using some form of evaluation, a project, an assignment, a test. And let's say you scored really well on it. Forget the fact that it's a 50% passing grade. Let's say you got really, you did 78 plus. In my opinion, that's a pretty good grade. We, as Seneca, then, will report that credential, fact that you graduated with a diploma or a degree or certificate at a high grade, and we will now send you as a product from Seneca, good quality product, to an employer, this office building here. Isn't that a beautiful building? But here's the thing. Along the way, you, the learner, cheated. You got a good mark on this test, not on your own merit, not using your own cognitive ability, not your own competencies, but you either contract cheated, somebody else wrote your assignment, you got somebody else to do your online test for you. I don't know, what's the traditional ways? You write things on your hand, whatever. And we're not babysitters, so we don't always catch you. That's on you. because employer at some point will figure this out. So you lied, you committed data fraud, you violated your integrity, and then I would assume, might as well add this in, you disappointed your good family name. But we sent you as a good quality product to the employer. Now that employer is not a moron. You can lie during an interview as well. You can fake your resume. But at some point they will ask you to do the job. And if you can't do the job, the stuff, a good boss will say, okay, what's a minimum they need to be able to do? Not over the top. But if you can't perform, then of course you're going to get fired, which is fine. That's on you. But look what happens. That employer now says, okay, maybe it was just a one-off. But if that happens again and again, that employer says, wait, Seneca's quality control system is broken. They then stop hiring graduates. They lose faith in the quality of our product. And that goes on for years until we build that trust again. So I thought I'd use cheating, academic integrity, as a perfect example of what data fraud is. How it works, you see? And in an organization, it's the same way. When you get results, and I'll just pop that chart back up, but when you get results like this, good results, and there's a number of ways you can get there, but it's not legitimate, it's not ethical, then the organization could suffer because the truth is based on falsities. It's not the truth. You made it out to be the truth. I thought that would be a perfect way to end our lesson on HR research. How to look at things from a different way, a different perspective. How to use the tools to get to the data that gives you an understanding of who and what and how and why your workforce is. To have your finger on the pulse of what they're up to segment them and group them and separate them on a list so you can view them from different angles. And then trying out different things creatively, putting resources and money towards it to change that behavior, and constantly assessing and monitoring using technology, Excel, for example, or HRIS. And then when you've arrived and everything is in good order, you then raise your benchmark. You raise the bar slightly, but then you accommodate your employees to achieve that level by offering incentives and training or other programs or policies. And then over the years, you find that you've so well fine-tuned and optimized how you manage your workforce that your organization now is so poised to take on competition, grow into new markets, but to remain competitive. And you, as an HR professional, have done your job. In fact, you've gained political power and you've gained the respect and a seat at the boardroom table. Now you know you have arrived as a professional in HR.